Yes, Mr. Kinnear.
So may I call Group Manager Nicholas Davis?
Good, thank you.
I swear by Almighty God
I swear by Almighty God
that the evidence I shall give
that the evidence I shall give
shall be the truth,
shall be the truth,
the whole truth,
and
nothing but the truth.
nothing but the truth.
Thank you very much, Mr. Davis. Yes, Mr. Kinnear.
Would you please confirm your name for the record?
Yeah, it's Nicholas Robert Davis.
Thank you, Mr. Davis. Thank you also for attending the inquiry today to give evidence. Hopefully in front of you there's a blue file, and if you open that blue file behind the first tab, you should find the statement you provided to the inquiry dated the 19th of July of this year. Is that right?
That's correct.
Have you read it recently?
Yes, I have.
And are there any corrections you'd like to make to it?
Yes, so just at the time of making the statement, I believed it was accurate. However, seeing some evidence given to the inquiry after I gave the statement, I spoke earlier about page 2, I believe it's paragraph 4, in relation to the quality assurance in relation to the plans on the ORD. That's just slightly incorrect on how I've written it up there.
And what is the correct evidence you'd wish to give?
So, at the time of making this evidence, I'd made an assumption that the plans on the MDT or the ORD had actually come through myself in my work queue on my station diary. However, subsequent evidence has indicated that process didn't happen. I never saw the plans or the map.
Right. Okay. We'll come on to the plans in due course, but thank you, Group Manager, for that. Subject to that amendment, can you confirm the contents of your statement are true?
Yes, I can.
And you're content for the statement to stand as evidence to the inquiry?
Yes, I am.
Thank you. As I've said to others, if any time you feel you need a break, please say so. That's not a problem. Okay. Secondly, if at any time my question's unclear, please say so, and I'll try and sort of correct any lack of clarity. Now, if I can deal with some preliminary matters first. Yep. Is it right that you are now a group manager?
That's correct, yeah.
And when were you promoted from station manager to group manager?
It was beginning of this year.
And is it right that you've been employed as a firefighter by the LFB for some 22 years?
That's correct.
And during your career you were a station manager at North Kensington?
That's correct.
And you say North Kensington included Kensington Fire Station as it was a twinned station, is that right?
Yeah, so context, some stations are single and other stations are twinned.
Okay. And is it right to assume that you're no longer the station manager at North Kensington?
That's correct.
Just flowing in respect of some of these preliminary questions, can you remember when you were first aware, in your capacity as the station manager at North Ken, of the refurbishment to Grenfell Tower?
So I believe I can't remember the exact date, but it was November 2015 when I was promoted in, and there was a period of a handover for possibly 2 weeks with the previous station manager, Daniel Hallisey, and he made me aware that there was refurbishment works going on at Grenfell Tower, and he updated me on his processes regarding the watches, familiarisation, visits to the tower.
Okay. And did he give you any detail regarding the nature and extent of the refurbishment at the tower?
Yes, so he gave me an overall view of his interpretation of the building works. He explained the relationship with Janice Ray, who's our point of contact at the TMO, and he explained the process of the crews doing familiarisation visits as the works progressed, and if any works were notified via Janice, then that's how we would be fed in via myself into the crews, and then they would then go revisit the tower to confirm any changes or adjustments to the building works.
Did he discuss with you, or did you raise with him, the need for a comprehensive review of the tower once the refurbishment was complete or near complete?
Yes, so part of the process, my understanding was that the crews would do familiarisation visits. The 72D process, or ORD, would only be updated as changes became apparent. Mm-hmm. Because of the frequency of the visits from the crews, it would just be logistically too hard and too time consuming for the crews to update that every time they went, unless there was a change to be updated on the system.
Okay. I suppose flowing from that, was the answer no to my question?
Sorry. Yeah.
Being blunt about it, did you ever discuss having a bottom to top review of Grenfell Tower in order to update the ORD?
Not to my recollection with Station Manager Hallisey. However, I must admit personally that would have crossed my mind that would be something to be done following all the completion works and any updates to be tidied up.
Was there any discussion with your predecessor of the building materials that had been used as part of the refurbishment? And here I'm particularly interested in cladding.
So there was a reference to cladding being used as part of the refurbishment. That was one part of the refurbishment. There was several stages to in essence, the lower 3 floors being converted. There was reference made to that. There was reference made to the dry rising main being adjusted to. So cladding was referenced, as well as a number of other factors as well.
Now, I appreciate this conversation happened in November 2015.
Yeah.
To what extent are you able to give us any detail regarding the briefing that you were given by your predecessor regarding the cladding?
So I can't give you the detail. If I'm honest, I can't recollect I know the cladding was referenced by him, as a number of other issues were.
Mm-hmm. Now, just to confirm, just so we have context, is it right to say that you were Watch Manager Ricketts' line manager at North Kent?
That's correct, yeah.
Okay. Now, the next set of questions I'd like to talk to you about is your role as station manager, what it involves. Now, pages 1 and 2 of your witness statement, you set this out, but you specifically say it includes, quotes, manage the performance of teams and individuals to achieve objectives. Is that right? Yeah,
so that's quite a generic statement, but it covers a multitude of performance issues. So that may be attendance, it may be attendance at fires, it could be training, it could be CFS. We have a number of indicators that we measure how effective and the amount of work that the watches and crews do at each fire station, not just obviously North Kensington.
And looking with particular focus on Section 72D visits, is it right that, as you set out at the second bullet point at the top of page 2 of your statement, the purpose is to ensure, quote, to ensure that watches are recording the appropriate sort of information in an appropriate way?
That's correct.
Now, we'll look at the precise policy 633 in due course, but could you give us a steer as to what your understanding is of the purpose of Section 72D?
So there's several purposes of the 72D. Primarily, it's a recording of risk for a premise. So as an example, I think Dean referenced before, there's around 80 72D premises on North Kensington's ground. So if you times that by 2, we've got 180 that I'm responsible for overall at both stations. That is to collate, my understanding is any risk that you would not expect to find at a premise is one of the things that we're aware of. So an example of the training I had many years ago was if we had a garage workshop, we would expect to find a acetylene cylinder at a garage workshop. So that would indicate that didn't need to go on an ORD because that was a known risk to us. That was initially how it was developed, and it's since progressed with the PRA, so the premise risk assessment is the tool that we use to determine if a premise was to go on the ORD.
Okay. Looking at with Section 72D and how that informs the ORD, could I ask you to turn to page 2 of your witness statement? And halfway down the second page, there's a title, My Role, If Any, in Section 72D visits, and then there's a large paragraph immediately below that. The last 4 lines of that large introductory paragraph, you say this: you'd get information from the Section 72D visits, then you say, I would then forward this information on to crews who would, or rather, you'd receive information. I would then forward this information on to crews who would visit Grenfell Tower to familiarise themselves with changes and update the ORD if appropriate. I would then check the information was recorded correctly on the ORD before this information was finally checked by LFB's predetermined allowance team. Now, could you help us with each stage of that? First of all, how would you check the information that was provided to you by your crews following their familiarisation visit?
So just to put a bit of context, I think what I'm referencing there is information from the TMO.
Right. Well, so is it specific to the TMO then?
I believe I'm referencing. Yeah, if it's not clear, that's what I'm meaning in that statement. So
well, let's deal with the information from the TMO first. Okay. You've got information coming through from the crews. How would you check that information provided by your crews was correct?
So I would, as professional fire officers, having perform that role myself. If an officer did a familiarisation visit to Grenfell, my expectation is the ORD would be updated if appropriate. That would come through to my work queue. However, generally, we would have a conversation as well. So the fire officer, in passing, in the office would then, Governor, by the way, I visited Grenfell the other week. We've seen the smoke extraction, or whatever the issue may be. Or it might even be that we visited the other week and there's no changes and it's exactly the same. So there would be several ways to be a verbal update. I would have confidence in my officers as professional officers. It's not my role to double check what they're telling me, if that makes sense. So I'm not going to go out and revisit Grenfell to confirm that someone's telling me the truth. As a professional fire officer, I would take their word for that.
Yeah. So looking at and we referred to this earlier, looking at the quality assurance function that you performed as station manager, so we understand how you discharged that. One was by means of these informal discussions which you've just discussed. Was there a formal element by which you carried out that quality assurance on the information your crews brought back to you?
Yeah, so there's several stages. So in essence, the formal one relating to the work queue station diary.
Yep.
So it would appear in my station diary, in my work queue, as an appointment to be checked, as would be the PRA. The PRA would appear first before the ORD, and there's a reason for that. So the PRA, again, I'm not to check the questions that have been answered within that. My job as the station manager is to look at the score that generates, and if appropriate, it may be that if it scores under 150, that it would be removed from the ORD. However, I would not do that purely on a score. That would be me speaking with the watch officer who attended, having a conversation. So I'd ask questions, although it scores below 150, is there any reason as an operational officer that you feel would warrant being on the ORD? So I would expect that to be as an officer on the MDT coming on to, so the local stations should be familiar with Grenfell, and all watches were. But if a neighbouring station, so say Paddington, attended Grenfell without North Kensington crews being there, that they could access information on the ORD. They actually don't have enough time to pull up the entirety of the MDT, so it may be a cursory look at a geographia map, so they're happy with the location and their route onto the site. Within that map also would be hydrants. So although hydrants is...
We'll come on to that detail later, Ms Davis. I understand why you want to get on to... Now, my questions were directed towards how you discharge the quality assurance function in respect of information coming directly from the TMO. Is that process, both its formal and informal aspects, different to the process you'd adopt in relation to information coming via Section 72D visits, or would it be the same?
So if I understand correctly, is there a difference between the TMO information and crews information?
Yeah, you drew the distinction.
Yeah, okay.
So what I'm trying to find out is whether you treated the information coming from your crews differently from the information you got via the TMO.
Yes, so I would want confirmation as professional firefighters that the information I'm getting from the TMO, I wouldn't say is accurate, but what impact does that have as professional firefighters if we attended that premise? Would that impact our firefighting tactics? It's not the TMO's job to tell us what impact that's going to have on our tactics. It's us as professional firefighters to make a judgment on that information.
Thank you. And just looking at the final element of that quoted part, you say the information was finally checked by LFB's predetermined attendance team. Now, first of all, is that predetermined attendance team based at North Ken, or is it based more centrally?
So that's a central office. So I don't know if it would help to explain the process of the ORD and how the different stages of quality assurance.
I think it would.
So as we've already mentioned, the PRA is, I would suggest, the initial process of determining how often a premise gets visited. The ORD is then completed by the watch officers. That then feeds in, having completed that visit, both the ORD and the PRA appear in my work queue. It's then up to me. My process would be to look at the PRA first. That would determine if the premise goes on the ORD and the frequency of visits. I then clear that off my work queue and then move on to the ORD part of the work queue. I then review the ORD. From there, if it's rejected for whatever reason, I might actually just want a bit of clarification over a bit of information. So I would then reject that item or the work queue, the ORD, that would then force it back to the original watch officer who completed it. 9 times out of 10 that would be followed up with either an email or a phone conversation to put a detail and a bit of context around the comment that I've entered on the system. Could then come back, or finally after me it then goes for a final check of PDA, which we call predetermined attendance, which is based at Union Street and headquarters. And that's the final checks and balance for the process.
Okay. And when you say the information is finally checked by LFB's predetermined attendance team,
Yeah.
presumably they're not second-guessing the information that's been fed up to them. Is that a fair assumption?
Yeah, so I think the advantage, you would have to speak to them to get the... I don't know what their process for QA is, if I'm honest. I've never worked in there. However, I would imagine as a central base team, they have the benefit of seeing Pan London. So there may be some historical information that they've seen as a benefit historically around London that as a station manager with North Kensington and Kensington, I might not be aware of. And again, it could be rejected. The same process would come back to myself, normally followed up by an email or a phone call, just to get a bit of context about why it's been rejected back to me.
Thank you, Mr Davies. The next topic I'd like to discuss with you is policies themselves.
Yeah.
Now, presumably you're familiar with policy 633.
Yeah.
Now, can you help us as to when, in the 2 years before Grenfell, when you were last trained in the detail of 633?
So I think it's been mentioned several times before previous people, we have a yearly ops assessment as a senior officer. I would have to refer to my ITR to give you the exact dates, but it's certainly yearly. I have an ops assessment. I would have been assessed on promotion rounds. And the general theme has been, I know it's been said before, there's always generally a theme around high-rise, FSG calls, or basements has been mentioned earlier by Dean.
Okay. And have you ever received any particular training on how to, first of all, conduct 7.2D visits, and then secondly, the QA role that a station manager has to perform?
Okay. So I have the benefit of being before the ORD came into fruition and onto the electronic version. So as they were then 11Ds, I had initial training at training school when I joined 22 years ago about the points to look for, how you speak to residents, making sure they've got escape plans. There was a checklist, in effect very similar to how the policy has it now. As we moved through the process, I had updates from line managers. So generally as a crew or watch manager, that would be input from my then station manager at my different stations where I've served. I remember getting input from the area fire safety team. So each area has their own regulatory fire safety team, and I remember at certain periods throughout my career getting an update from them. What I would say is comment is that I've sometimes had subjective training, so there's no formal training laid down that I've received. It's always been from a superior line manager, and they would say there's been a change to the ORD process. And I certainly remember with the development of the current system with the ORD, that was an ongoing process. So the process we see now wasn't the one that we had at the very start. As it comes in, it develops, and they make additions to hopefully make it work better.
Have you provided any training, or did you provide any training during your time at North Ken to your crews on how to carry out a Section 7.2D visit?
So not to my crews, so specifically all 4 watch managers at North Ken were what we would call substantive. So they weren't on development. If they were on development, then that would be part of my assessment process for them that we would cover, how they would do and how would they complete and how would they record the 7.2D process and the ORD. I did part of the process of the station manager is to perform a role of QA quality assurance at the station. We have 4 areas that we cover. QA4, to my recollection, covers the ORD and fire safety. What that would involve with whoever the watch was on duty at that time, I would sit down with the watch officer. I would actually ask them to sample from the ORD database, so that in effect pull that up. We would sit in front of the computer screen to discuss the ORD, talk through the different sections of the ORD. I would then, part of my personal one, I would get a member of the crew to print off a copy of the ORD for the MDT. So I think it's probably worth mentioning that sometimes the documents you see printed off as the ORD from a a PC is different to how the format is on the MDT.
But the information is the same.
It's the same, but it's laid out differently. So an example would be the map or the plans. So yeah,
We'll come on to that separately,
okay,
Ms Davis. If we can just deal with training, just deal with one point. What training did you receive in the 2 previous years before Grenfell in respect of policy 800, so the management of operational risk information?
So for me personally, I received no training in managing that. No, as a station manager.
No training at all?
No.
No.
As a station manager, no.
Okay. Could I ask you now to turn to policy 633? And it's the reference, Danny, is LFB *0001256. And if I could ask Danny to turn to page 7 and paragraph 4.1. And Danny, if you could amplify 4.1, I'll just let you read that. Mr. Davis, you said you hadn't received any training in respect of policy 800. Are you familiar with policy 800?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. And so do you feel that you'd be able to quality assure information gathered and recorded in accordance with the provisions of policy 800?
So from my personal view as an operational watch manager, where I've been out on visits myself, where I've been quality assured myself from previous line managers, I felt comfortable to quality assure policy 800, yes.
When you're discharging that quality assurance function as station manager during your time at North Ken, did you feel at any time any general concerns regarding the adequacy of the information that was being collated and sought to be put into the ORD?
So, to put into context, I started, as we discussed, in November 2015. So the ORD database was already there. Had already been visited by a number of previous crews, had already been quality assured by a number of previous officers. As I went through the process, I noticed the maps needed, I wouldn't say all of them, because the volume of work that we have as a station manager, I didn't have the luxury to go through all 180 72Ds to individually quality assure them. It would be, as we were going through that process, as they arrived through my work queue, I would then go through the ORD itself. To put into context for the crews that visited, we had a number of IT issues with maps in relation to loading up maps. So I think, to put into context, a architect's map would not be compatible with our ORD system. It physically would not fit on the ORD system.
Apologies to interrupt,
Yeah.
Mr. Davis. My question was, during your time as station manager,
Yeah.
did you have any concerns, general concerns, regarding the adequacy of the information that was being collected by your crews and sought to be put onto the ORD?
No general concerns, no.
Now, going back to policy 633, if I could ask Danny to amplify paragraph 4.3. You see, under the heading planning, it says simple line drawings identifying individual compartments or flat numbers associated with floor levels will assist prioritising rescue operations. This is of particular importance where multiple compartments over many levels may be affected by fire or smoke. Some residential flats have emergency exits, which should be recorded. First of all, can we take it that you're familiar with that provision?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Now, in relation to high-rise buildings on your patch at North Ken, how often was that requirement complied with in relation to the information you saw on the ORD?
It would be very hard for me to give you an exact number. What I can say is there was occasions where it was, there was occasions where it wasn't, or there was occasions where it needed adjusting. So it probably wasn't sufficient for the MDT to be printed off. So I'm afraid I can't give you an exact number.
Would you have expected the plans to be provided by the building owner for these purposes?
What I can say is my experience as a watch officer, because in essence it's their role to provide the plans and upload them on the system. This can be particularly difficult, so it may be, as it says, we need simple line drawings. To actually get a simple line drawing or a floor layout that would have the relevant information for us and the ORD is actually quite tricky to get. So most,
What are the difficulties then?
so you would ask for a map layout from the responsible person for the building. Generally speaking, they would have an architectural plan. That's just no benefit to us for the ORD. It doesn't work. It has too much detail. It doesn't fit on the system. So, in effect, we're asking them to simplify that for us to put it on the system, or we try to simplify it ourselves, which I'm afraid I'm not an IT expert on online drawing of maps. So, I personally found that quite difficult to do as a watch officer.
As a watch manager, would you, looking at the differently, what problems would there be if a watch manager simply asked during the course of a Section 72D visit, asked the responsible person or its representative, could I have simple line drawings identifying individual compartments, etc.? There's nothing stopping them doing that, is there?
No, and the expectation is that they would,
No.
if plans were required.
Yeah. And you say if plans were required, can we take it that in relation to a high-rise residential building, plans would be required?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Sorry, I think what I meant was if they weren't on the system already.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, if I could ask Danny to turn now to paragraph 4.6. It says that planning must consider the knowledge and understanding of fixed installations and how they can assist fire and rescue operations. Where required, advice and guidance should be obtained from fire safety officers regarding fixed installations provided, such as sprinklers, ventilation systems, including manual overrides and rising mains. FSOs can be invited to familiarisation visits. Now, stopping there, would your understanding of 633 mean that fixed installations includes cladding systems?
No.
No. Whereas here there was a smoke ventilation system, would you have expected the watch manager who was carrying out the Section 72D visit to have brought along with him a fire safety officer to assist on identifying how, first of all, what fixed installations there were in the building, and secondly, how to use them?
That would be the ideal. I think in context, the fire safety team are very, very busy, so it may be that they would have to attend without a fire safety officer. The ideal would be that they would attend with you. I think especially if it's a complex system, that would be the ideal, yes.
Is there any scheme whereby the attendance of fire safety officers is prioritised?
So, in essence, the watch officer would either ask directly or come through the station manager. I couldn't answer on their behalf how they prioritise their work. We would give them an indication of why we wanted them, and then they would either answer yes or no, in my experience, if they could attend.
Would the fact that you were dealing with a smoke ventilation system in a high-rise residential building, would that be a priority to attract the attendance of a fire safety officer for the purposes of a Section 72D visit?
I couldn't answer on their behalf, so I wouldn't know.
But I mean, in your experience as a watch manager?
I think for us, because we've asked, would show that we would like them there.
I suppose pressing you on this, would the sheer fact that it was a high-rise residential building, would that be a priority in itself for a watch manager to say, listen, I want a fire safety officer here to assist me review the fixed installations?
On its own as a high-rise wouldn't make it. We would assess all the risks without the building. It wouldn't just be because it was high-rise.
What particular factors would heighten the risk that would justify the attendance of an FSO?
So things like a complex layout. So I think we discussed earlier evidence a scissor layout, particularly complicated smoke extraction system. There could be a number of, I wouldn't say concerns, but clarification that you would like from a suitably qualified officer to make sure that the information you give or is given is accurate.
And would a significant number of residents with vulnerabilities or disabilities raise the risk profile, thereby justifying the need for a fire safety officer to attend Section 72D visits?
So you would certainly have to make allowance, and that would be part of your consideration.
Okay. Danny, could I now turn to Appendix 1 of Policy 633, which is at internal page 19. Group Manager, I suspect you're well familiar with this appendix. Now, In your experience, would you expect your crews to use paragraph 1 of Appendix 1 as a checklist for the purposes of conducting a Section 72D visit?
So I necessarily wouldn't expect them to, as an example, print that off and take them with them. I certainly wouldn't expect crews to do that. The amount of visits that the crews do, they should be very familiar with that list, in my experience.
Okay. And how would you expect crews to record the information they're provided with during the course of a Section 72D visit?
So it's not laid down. For me personally, I would print off the ORD.
And manually and write on any amendments?
And I would use that as a checklist also, as a right, can we just check, is that smoke extraction system still the same? Has it been upgraded? It would list, in essence, the stuff that was there previously that I can double check, and also if there's been any alterations.
Okay, thank you. If we can now turn to Policy 800, and Danny, the reference is LFB quintuple 0705. That's the policy you said you were familiar with earlier on. If we could turn to internal page 2, and section 3 on that page. And there at the bottom, Group Manager, you've got section 3, the gathering operational risk information. And it identifies 5 stages, the latter 2 are over leaf. If I could ask Danny to go to that 5th stage at the top of page 3. And it says there, that could be amplified, the ORD is linked to the station diary and will be completed, updated for each scheduled diary visit. Now, does that 5-stage process reflect the process you had in place at North Cairn during your time as station manager?
Yes, it does.
Can I ask you this? The wording of these policies gives me at least the impression that the Section 72D obligation was entirely performed by sending crews to inspect the premises. Is that your understanding, or does it go wider than that?
There was, it might help in the context of the process and how the database came into being, as it were. When we had the paper trails that have been discussed earlier, in essence, the operational risk database was created. It had no electronic data on it apart from an appointment that then we used the station diary to program that appointment. As time progressed, the information from paper got transposed. So I think there's been reference made to the contingency plan 2009. That in essence is when the electronic version was created for Grenfell. So that's just giving you an indication of the date that the ORD for Grenfell was created. There will be a period of time, and I wouldn't know when that was, when the information got transposed onto the electronic version. We went through a period of everyone uploaded all the risks, as we discussed about the garage with a known risk. We then got told to remove some of the risks because we put too many on the ORD and the database couldn't cope with that much information. So then we had a period of time where those that were on in essence, were being revisited, and there was a period of time where we had to revisit them. And that was generally down to, as was discussed earlier, if local crews knowledge, direction from the station manager, if they knew their ground, from your area DAC would come round and maybe give you, there were some updates that came out regarding trying to prioritise high-rise, vulnerable people, residential care homes. I couldn't give you the date on that. There was different inputs that helped us prioritise that risk and get the database back up to date. I don't know if that helps.
But what I was thinking of was how do you get the information that the database requires?
Yeah.
And is it your understanding that it's only obtained by visits of crews to the premises concerned, or
so that could come
is there a role, for example, for the station manager?
Yeah, definitely. So it could be a new premise. So it would come sometimes through our regulatory fire safety, would send me an email as a station manager to notify me that there's a new building. That would involve me sending crews down to do an inspection. So it necessarily wouldn't be a 72D. It would be to have a look. This is a building site, get some information. They'll come back and say, Governor, there's a high-rise building going up at so-and-so. The access is going to be this. Right, okay. How long are we going to be looking before it's ready for an inspection? So that's one way. It could be following a home fire safety visit. could be following a fire at a building. There could be certain periods that crews would interact or the information would come to us from another source. It might be a safeguarding referral. There's a number of avenues that could come to us. The ORD would also record cylinders, so medical cylinders. So that could come from a home fire safety visit. So the crews can create their own premise. It doesn't have to be me as a station manager. So if they...
Well, to be honest, what had prompted my question was, and maybe we're going to come back to this, but since I've started, I'm going to pursue this. Floor plans.
Yep,
Crew can obviously ask the responsible person for floor plan
they can.
and may or may not get them. But is there any reason why the station manager shouldn't take the initiative and write straight to the building owner and say, we need the floor plan?
Yeah, certainly if I can and I'm aware of it, that would come up in the process of quality assurance, then I wouldn't like to say I can apply pressure, but sometimes a station manager may formally write to them. I may go through regulatory fire safety if I feel that there's another reason that I may be able to request them. There's no reason why we couldn't. Generally, we do get them, it just takes a bit of time to get them.
Yeah.
It's my experience.
Well, we may want to pursue this a bit further later on.
I think we may come on to it later on.
Sorry if I
no,
shot your fox.
it's stolen my thunder. But Mr. Davis, could we go back to 800? And if I could ask Danny just to take down this amplified section and then put up paragraphs 3.3 to 3.5. And looking at the last bullet point again, it sets out the various time frames in 3.3 as to completion of each stage. And the final bullet point under 3.3 is station manager to review tactical plan. Now, do you accept that's a process you would have discharged at North Ken when reviewing the ORD in relation to Grenfell?
So in relation to 16 days?
Well, no, just first of all looking at the obligation. Ignore the time scale, just look at the obligation.
Yeah, definitely. Reviewing the tactical plan, yes.
And if we can go on to 3.4 and 3.5, again, the primary purpose of the ORD is to record significant hazards risks, including any less obvious hazards and unique control measures in place, as well as any particular tactical plans or command and control procedures required. Would you agree with that summary of the primary purpose of the ORD?
Absolutely. I think I alluded that earlier, didn't I?
You did. And and then going on finally to 3.5, all risk critical information will be fed to the MDT and thus be available for the appliance commander and crews to access en route. This information will support the safe management and enhance the successful resolution of the incident. Again, from what you said previously, I assume that's a statement of principle you'd endorse.
Yes, definitely.
Now, what training did you provide to your crews at North Ken on the importance of gathering the significant hazard and risks, including the less obvious hazards and the unique control measures for the purposes of the ORD? None. Looking at 3.5, what training did you give to your crews in relation to the importance of risk-critical information?
No.
Can you give us an explanation as to why, in your capacity as station manager, you didn't provide your crews with training on those two, what appear to be very important aspects of the ORD function?
Yeah, so if in my role as the station manager is not to provide training for crews at the station, that's down to the station, the watch officers to allocate their training. They have training programs that they adhere to, and part of the process would be within a training program, you look at the risks within your station ground, and I know from experience that all 4 watches had high-rise and 72Ds within their training program that they adopted. It's not my role to deliver training to the watch. However, what I will say is if during reviewing a ORD that there was a significant, I missed the point completely, then that is my role. Actually, that's my role to quality assure and go through the process with the individuals. As I said, I had 4 substantive watch managers at North Ken, experienced officers, spoke to Dean earlier. I had no opportunity, no reason to sit down and go through that process with the ORDs that came through my work queue.
Thank you. And could I turn to a separate topic for the moment? That's the statutory notice, which I don't know whether you were following this morning's evidence. Yeah. Reference TMO 00832135. I suppose my first question, Mr. Davis, is have you seen this letter before?
I have, yes.
Yes. And can you remember when you first saw this letter?
Oh, I believe I was shown it by my group manager at the time, Rob Davis. It was in relation, if my memory was, oh, sorry.
Do you want to just...
Do you want it enlarged?
Yeah. Sorry, I may be mistaken. I thought this was a letter related to Adair Tower. So I don't believe I've seen this specific letter relating to Grenfell.
Okay.
Sorry.
Don't worry. If we can go to internal page 5. I'll let you just skim read the observations made. And having skim read that, does that jog any memory in relation to Grenfell as opposed to Adair?
I don't recall seeing that. It's not to say I haven't seen it, but I don't recall seeing that letter.
As a matter of course, would statutory notices in relation to a building within your patch, would they be sent to you as a matter of course, so you knew what issues had been identified?
I would certainly be aware of them. They would certainly come up in the meetings with the TMO that I attend. So it may be that I am aware of it, I just can't recall seeing it.
Looking at, say, for example, the Article 17.1, the first one, at the time of the audit, you had not ensured a suitable system of maintenance was in place. It was found that several of the fire doors protecting your escape staircase did not close fully into their frame. Would that be information that you'd ordinarily feed through to the ORD?
No, so without check, and I would have to clarify, but this appears to me that this is following a regulatory fire safety inspection.
Presumably.
Not an inspection by crews.
Okay. But I suppose my question is, should this information, given the issues it covers, be fed through into the ORD process?
Not necessarily, no.
And why do you say that?
That amount of detail, we just haven't got the capacity to put that on the system. It would be important information that crews should be aware of, but that would be local crews. There is no, to my knowledge, an area within the ORD to accommodate that level of detail.
Okay. Now going to turn on to the operational risk database itself.
Yeah.
But before we do, Danny, could I ask you to bring up document LFB quadruple 03114 on the second page of that document? Now, Mr. Davis, first of all, have you seen this document before?
I've seen it at the inquiry.
Okay. And you'll see roughly halfway down the page, there is under development comment 1/2, the operational risk database.
Yep.
There we go. And it says access through the MDT did not provide sufficient information on Grenfell Tower, in particular the tactical plan and floor plans. Now, at the outset...
I'm sorry, Mr. Kinney, can we highlight the next
Yeah,
box
they're
down,
linked.
because it's a continuation?
It is.
That's it.
And then you see 2.2, review PN 800, consider the training provided to staff and collating and recording key information on the ORD, ensure there is a suitable quality assurance process in place. Now, dealing with the first one of those,
Yeah.
is that a conclusion with which you'd agree?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Can you help us, in your own mind, what do you think the deficiencies were in the ORD in relation to Grenfell?
So the lack of a floor plan that was usable for the initial crews, and specifically within briefing BA crews, from my experience, I think if they had a sufficient floor plan, that would have assisted the briefing of the commanders at the bridgehead. I will give some context to that colleagues and friends that attended did say that the breakdown of the internal structure of the building would have made the internal layouts actually useless at one point. So although they would have helped initially with briefings, as the incident progressed, they would have been no use at all.
Now, if we can put that down, Danny, could we bring up the ORD itself, which is LFB quadruple 03116. First of all, just to ensure we're all singing from the same hymn sheet, do you agree this is the ORD in relation to Grenfell?
So that is a version, screenshot of the ORD for Grenfell. I don't know if it helps, again, with context, there's different versions of that same one. So what I mean by that, the detail's the same, but the layout and the format is different for what role you have within LFB.
Okay. But the information is the same across all formats?
Yes.
Okay. Now, it says in the top right there, approved by Davis NI, presumably that's you?
Yep.
There we go. And we've got complete, on the left-hand column, we've got completed by Ricketts. So that's presumably that's Dean Ricketts?
Yep.
And the date, 15th of February 2017. What does that date relate to? Can you help us with that?
So looking at that date, I would have to double check the date of Dean's visit, which is on the screen below.
If you look below the amplified bit.
Yeah. So that would tell me that that's the date relating to Dean's visit that you discussed earlier.
Now, would the ORD have been last approved by you on or about, let's assume the 15th of February date is correct, that's when you would have approved it?
That's what it would allude to. However, that's, as I said in my statement, having seen some other documents, it would suggest that it's never come to me for approval.
Okay.
If you look at the bulk of the detail below, there's no my last name reference is plans are required for MDT.
Yeah.
So if I've approved it, my name should appear between Dean Ricketts and Phil Jobson at the very top.
I see. And it isn't there?
It's not there.
Okay. Can you explain, therefore, how your name came to be inputted in the top right, box in the top right-hand corner?
I can't.
Okay. Now, if we can look at page 1 and we can look at the entry for the date of the 28th of April, or sorry, the 20th of April 2017 at the top. Can you help us with data quality checks completed, what that might involve?
So that's, as I described earlier, the different stages of quality assurance. So that would describe Dean Ricketts' initial visit. It would give a brief description of his update that he's done on the ORD. And then that data quality checks completed by Phil Jobson. Phil is a colleague who used to work in the PDA department. So he would be that, as I said, that final checks and balance at the end of the process.
That final element of this.
Yeah. And obviously there should be an entry or a section with my name on that that would say I've approved that or quality checks completed.
Okay, if Danny can bring that down, and then if we can look at the previous visit comments,
Yep.
which is above the earlier visit comments box, that's amplified.
Yep.
It says there are no comments applied for this visit. Davis NI, that's you,
Yep.
28th of April 2017, so 8 days after the earlier entry. Are you able to help us with why no comments were applied for whatever visit that entry relates to?
So I can't actually give you a definitive explanation on that. We had some, I would describe as gremlins or issues with the IT systems related to the ORD.
Were they general or specific to North Cairn?
General, on the whole system. So the easiest way to describe it, the work queue that you would have as a station manager would open up a different screen for the ORD than a watch manager. In effect, I have different permissions, so I'm allowed to do certain things that they aren't. However, you would on occasion open up your station diary to find duplicates. So instead of, say, 5 or 6 ORDs to be quality assured, you'd have double. And they, in effect, as an example, you may have 2 for Grenfell. One would be the station manager's work queue one, and then you would also have, for some reason, a watch manager's one on the system. When I first had this issue, I spoke to PDA and just said, I'm having this issue with IT systems. I seem to be getting duplicates. They said, oh, you just have to go through it and in essence, approve it. Don't open it, just get rid of it, and it comes off your work queue, because it just doesn't, otherwise it will clog up the system. I did double check the initial ones that it didn't make any impact on the visit. So what I didn't want to do was to do that and then have a detrimental, either remove data or remove information from the ORD. It just didn't seem to make any effect. It was just a blip on the system for some reason.
Okay, if we can de-amplify that box, and if we look down at your entry under earlier visit comments, where it says plans are required for MDT, Davis NI, 10th of May 2016. So there we go. Plans are required for the MDT.
Yeah.
Do you remember inputting that comment?
I can't specifically remember. As I said, 180 72Ds between the two stations. However, looking at the system, it would have jumped out to me that there were no plans on the MDT.
Yeah.
So I've done my quality assurance checks, and I've returned that to Adam there to upload, as the comment says. I probably would have followed it up with a conversation. I've checked my emails. There's no reference to me emailing him specifically, but either he would have called me or I would have spoken to him over that.
Was there anything stopping you, following on from the chairman's questioning, was there anything stopping you phoning up the TMO saying, can we have plans?
Initially it would be workload. If I'm honest, I just haven't got the capacity to do that detail. That's the watch managers. If, as we discussed, the watch officer came to me and said, Governor, I'm having real problems getting plans there, for whatever reason I can't get them, then I would obviously take that up, but I wouldn't initially, having received that or quality assured, take that up myself.
Okay. Given the importance you've attached to plans and given it's their omission you've identified as a deficiency, could you have done more to have chased down those plans at the time, given their importance to the tactical plan and other matters?
Hindsight? Yeah. I think if I was being brutal, to context that the workload for two stations is quite phenomenal. Bear in mind, I knew Grenfell because I'd visited it myself within my first month of attending. So I was aware of Grenfell. I just didn't have capacity. If I'd put two and two together, then I probably would have requested that. Unfortunately, I just didn't.
Okay. Could I ask Danny to de-amplify that box and go to page 3 of the ORD? And you'll see, Mr. Davis, below the map, there's the legend hazards and inspection notes. And it says high-rise premises of 20 floors. Now, would you agree that that's inaccurate? Yeah. When would you have expected that inaccuracy to be picked up?
So, it's not for me as my role as a station manager. I know it's glaringly obvious now where we stand that is inaccurate, but in my role as the station manager quality assure, it's not for me to go round and count the floors. The expectation is that professional officers would update that information accurately as and when it changed.
Okay. So the evidence we've heard is that the focus of the Section 72D visit, say for example in March 2017, was particular to the basement.
Yeah.
Now, given that each Section 72D visit seems to have a particular focus, when do they have the opportunity to identify basic information such as the number of floors is inaccurate?
So, in hindsight, again, if that had appeared back on my work queue, having the works been completed, I think that would have been a prompt for me, I hope, to say, actually, let's do a review, as you suggested earlier. As the time that the works have been completed, let's do a belt and braces from start to finish review, make sure all the information's accurate. I didn't pick that up, so I can only assume that's why it wasn't done.
Okay. Could I ask Danny to pull that down and turn to page 4 of the ORD? Now, here we've got and Danny, don't amplify anything for the moment. At the top of the page you have tactical plan.
Yeah.
Then operational contingency plan. What, from the lay perspective, what appears to be missing is the tactical plan. Is that a lay mistake, or can you explain it, where the tactical plan ought to be found there?
Yeah, so I think this might help with the context of the format that you're viewing this document in. So within the MDT, you have the option to print off under certain tabs. So the tab for the tactical plan, if you were to select that and print that tactical plan off, if you were to, that would have all that information that's below there to the next area that has a highlighted text.
Right.
So if you were to scan through the document, you'll come to an area that has another title that's highlighted.
If Danny could turn to page 5.
And again,
No, page 6.
so in essence, that is the entire tactical plan that you've just viewed there.
So when you say the entirety of it, do you mean those boxes there, or the...
Yeah, that all forms part of a tactical plan for an incident commander. I would not, to probably put context, I wouldn't expect on the ORD to have step-by-step instructions for an incident commander to fight a fire in Grenfell Tower. Every fire is different, and we can see obvious consequences of where we were with Grenfell. However, a professional officer would want information that would formulate his tactical plan. And that's in that part of the ORD, my understanding, that's where that information, it's not to give a incident commander a step-by-step guide to put in a fire out, because every fire is different. It would be dangerous for an incident commander to put a fire out by reading a book. That's not what incident commanders do. They're trained, they're professional officers. However, information may be on there that would formulate their tactical plan.
Okay. But looking at this page in particular, and looking at the operational contingency plan box, you'll see there, we don't need to amplify, it's got date effective from and date documented the 30th of October 2009. We were discussing this with Mr. Ricketts, and I think you indicated earlier on you'd like to... This is when the entry was first created for Grenfell.
Yeah, so that, in essence, was the date. I'm assuming I wasn't there at the time, so that's how I would read that document, that the plan was first created on that date. We wouldn't necessarily look to update that box every time an update was done. It's the same plan.
So you'd update the information, but not necessarily change the version identification.
As an example, if in error it had been deleted in error and a new plan had to be created, then there could be a discussion for actually that's plan number 2, because the first one was deleted.
Staying with page 4, further down the page, you've got communications, the third box up from the bottom of the page.
Yeah.
It says handheld radioed good comms in sub-basement channel 1. Given it's a high-rise residential building, would you have expected an adequate ORD to include information regarding adequacy of communications further up the tower?
So, in my experience, a high-rise generally has poor communications. That's my general experience.
Would that be the general assumption that your crews would have had attending a fire in a high-rise?
I would expect so, yeah.
Would you have expected, Danny, you can de-amplify that now, would you have expected an ORD to emphasise there was a single staircase as the means of access and evacuation?
It would be important information. It wouldn't be, as we described earlier, it wouldn't be an unexpected single staircase. When I visited Grenfell, that was, in fact, I would have been surprised if there was a second staircase. In my experience of building,
because of the age of the building.
The age of the building, the size, you could tell by the architecture of the estate that it was of that era, and there was no expectation. In fact, I said I would be surprised if there was a second staircase within Grenfell.
Before we leave page 4, looking at the last box on that page, the premises information box, PIB.
Yep.
And it says, is there a PIB at this address? False. What do you think false means there?
That there isn't one. Okay. So I think this is a good example that if you were to print off the ORD, it doesn't read as false. It reads as not there.
When you were reviewing the contents of the ORD, would you have expected a PIB to be at Grenfell given it was undergoing a fairly significant renovation?
So my recollection is similar to Dean's earlier when he said that we had a conversation around the premise information box. So my understanding, and I would have to check my emails about this, is I had a conversation with Dean that a premise information box would be suitable, and I spoke to Janice Ray at the TMO, and I remember giving her the details of what information should be contained within the premise information box.
And can you recall whether you ever received confirmation from Janice Ray or anyone else at the TMO that a PIB had been installed, or if it hadn't, the reasons why they hadn't installed it?
I can't remember. I remember she acknowledging that she received that information, but I don't recall being told that one had been installed.
You don't? Do you recall pursuing the point any further with her?
No, I don't.
Could I go back to page 1 of the ORD, and it's the entry for the 30th of April 2016. There you go, in the middle of the page there. I'll just let you read that, Mr. Davis, just so. Ms Davis, looking at that information, do you think it gave enough detail to allow crews to operate the negative pressure ventilation system?
I wouldn't expect the crews to operate that negative ventilation system.
Who would?
It's an automatic system.
But if they needed to, I suppose.
A senior fire safety officer is my understanding as a incident commander, especially if I'm told it's an automatic system. I or any of my crews, I would not ask them to, in effect, operate that system without some expert knowledge about the system or some specific training that a senior fire safety officer has. And I think, in context, that I've got no understanding of what impact that might have on residents or crews. I could think I'm doing the right thing, but could make the situation worse.
Okay. Could I now deal with a separate matter, site visit to Grenfell Tower in July 2016?
Right.
Now, do you recall Janice Ray of the TMO contacting you to arrange a site visit for the crews at North Ken to visit the tower on the 26th of July 2016 with the contractor Ryden?
If there was an email, that might jog my memory, because I had a lot of correspondence with Janice Ray, I'm afraid.
Don't worry. LFB *000 1130. I'll let you read that. It may well be
Might need to have it highlighted,
Is
Yeah.
there,
expanded a bit, perhaps.
there'll be an email from Janice to me before that.
Yeah. Are you able to scroll to page 2? And if you see at the bottom, email 20th of July,
Yeah.
does that help?
Okay. Okay. Yeah.
Did you attend? Do you recall whether the visit went ahead on the 26th of July 2016 or not?
I would have to check my diary, because I did attend twice to Grenfell, but I can't remember the exact dates. One was very soon when I started, and one was later on.
Okay. Could I ask Danny to put down that document and then put up LFB *000 1135? Now, at the bottom half of that page is an email from Mr. Dowden.
Yeah.
Which appears to be confirming the visit on the 26th of July. Do you recall Mr. Dowden attending on the 26th of July?
So that would suggest to the emails that I forwarded it to Mike to attend. As I said, all the watches did attend at different points throughout the refurbishment works. Without checking my diary to see if I attended, but that would assume that Mike Dowden did attend on that date.
Would you have expected, following the visit in July 2016, given the state of the refurbishment, would you have expected a significant updating of the ORD following a site visit?
Without knowing what or any changes had been at that point, and in relation to the other visits on the ORD, I couldn't tell you.
Okay, if we go back, if we put that down and go back to the ORD, which is LFB *000 3116, and look at and look at the entries there. I'm sorry, if we turn over the page, actually, maybe the better one.
No.
Sorry, no, if we can go back to page 1.
So that was 21st of July, I think, if my memory was
26th of July,
2016.
2016. And apologies, I thought there was something on the other page, but
Yeah.
if you look, there doesn't appear to be any entry following the visit of July 2016. Would you agree?
Yes.
Okay. Are you able to explain why the ORD wasn't updated following that visit?
So I would, not speaking for Mike, but I would imagine that the visit by Adam Foster, where he's listed some works that were done, when Mike visited, in his opinion, there was no updates for the ORD to be done. But I'm assuming, I can't speak for Mike.
Don't speculate.
Yeah.
If you don't know, you don't know. Looking at page 1, looking under the box earlier visit comments, the second entry from the top is in the name of Mr. Ricketts, dated the 15th of February of 2017. Now, he said in evidence he thinks actually in reality the date of the visit was the 27th of March 2017. Are you able to confirm one way or another?
As a watch manager, in my previous role, Dean's explanation of how that possibly might have happened, I think, is quite an accurate one, that sometimes he may have had an incident come in when the original visit was booked. Obviously, they do these visits whilst they're on the run and operationally ready. Yeah. So sometimes things come in. He may have just left it on the original date, and actually the date he did the visit, he completed it incorrectly, date-wise, if that makes sense.
Okay. And were you aware of the purpose of the visit, whether it was in February or March 2017?
No.
Did you follow up once Mr. Ricketts was back at the station? Did you follow up with him what he'd encountered during the course of his visit?
So I recall me and Dean having a conversation about the premise information box, as he said earlier. I remember forwarding, having conversations with Janice Ray and giving her details specific to the premise information box. And I remember giving her a generic list. But what I will say is, but context in relation to, so similar to the 72D list, it's a comprehensive list. However, it may be that they don't have to put everything in the box that's on that list. It's what's suitable and what's required for the building and the risks around that.
Following his attendance, he obviously inputted the box he's written there, all building works now complete.
Yeah.
When you were looking at, can you recall, first of all, looking and reviewing that particular entry?
No.
No. Is that so you can't remember it, or you didn't?
I can't remember reviewing it because I think I would have picked up, well, I would have, that the plans weren't on it.
Okay. And can you give us a reason as to why you wouldn't have, given the quality assurance function of the station manager?
As indicated there, it wasn't in my work queue.
Okay.
It doesn't appear to have come through to my work queue to process.
Do you remember whether Mr. Ricketts raised with you the question why the building had a dry riser as opposed to a wet riser?
Yeah.
Yeah. And can you remember what he said to you?
It was something that I noticed when I first went to Grenfell as well. The wet riser is generally for 60 metres and over, and doing the rough calculations, 3 metres, you could make a calculated guess how they'd got away with a dry riser and the timings of it. I did have a conversation, and I can't remember who with, about why it was done. I remember speaking to Regulatory Fire Safety in passing, not as a formal, about why would that be the case under refurbishment? Would they not have to refurb and change that? And the answer I got is that would have been down to the building regs for that time. They would have done a risk assessment, they would have followed their process. I remember specifically speaking to the contractor about it, and I did receive some emails that in essence showed the process that they had gone through. And I can't remember whether, but they have been submitted as evidence.
No. But you contacted Ryden, did you? Is that?
Yes.
And you were satisfied, it would appear, with the responses you got back from Ryden?
It confirmed what the Regulatory Fire Safety people had said, that they'd abided. I'm not an expert, so I suppose I couldn't quality assure their information they were giving me because I didn't understand the building regulations.
Could I, looking at the, excuse me, the information on the earlier visit comments box, from your perspective as the station manager carrying out the quality assurance role, do you consider a crew would have adequate information as to how to get into the building from what's set out there?
So my local crews at North Kensington, in essence, my expectation is they wouldn't reference this. The local crews would be suitably familiar with the building, that they would know need, and speaking to the Red Watch on the night of the incident, they didn't reference this, they didn't need to, they were familiar with the building. I think that's sufficient information. In fact, there's certain parts that, it sounds a difficult thing to say, maybe too detailed in parts. I remember being asked to, as a watch officer, I was putting too much detail on there. However, the relative information about the drop access key is contained within the ORD. The fact that there's an AFA panel, the fact that there's a automatic ventilation system. I think the big concern for me is there's no map, there's no floor plan on it.
And that's the big omission from your perspective.
Yes.
When you're carrying out, I should have asked you this earlier, when you're carrying out the quality assurance function, do you put yourself in the shoes of the incident commander? Basically, what information would the information commander need, and then use that as the benchmark against which you test the information within the ORD?
Absolutely, yeah. So, but I would qualify, there's two stages of incident commander. So I would give you the initial incident commander.
Yeah.
So that will be the watch manager or crew manager on the appliance, who actually physically cannot access that whilst the appliance is en route. But he may request, or they may request, to have a copy printed off for them to reference as it progresses. However, as an incident does progress, like Grenfell did, then a senior officer may then nail down into more detail within the ORD, if that makes sense.
Danny, if you wouldn't mind pulling that down and then putting up page 5 of the ORD. Now, if you're looking at from the bottom of that page, I think third box on the bottom, emergency contacts. Now, ordinarily, who would you expect to see there as the emergency contact?
So it would depend on the premise. So if it was a residential...
Looking at high-rise residential.
High-rise residential, so in my experience, they now generally don't have a 24-hour contact, if I'm honest. Some do, some may have a concierge service. I know Kensington and Chelsea have an on-call facility, so that would be triggered with the automatic fire alarm being actuated. So that would trigger their attendance at this incident. So at a high-rise, if you would have a responsible person contact, so it would be someone, as is there, resident liaison officer. There could be numerous titles for them, but it would be a person that you could contact initially to arrange your visit.
And you'd expect them to be employees of the responsible person, as opposed, for example, to the contractors who are carrying out the refurbishment?
It could be either or both. I think, as we've got here, we've got the contractor on there as well. To me, that's a sensible move. That's actually gone above what I would expect. It shows someone conscientious has added that, actually, because that might be a really important bit of information if an incident develops. Given,
as you said, high-rise residentials don't tend to have 24 concierge or contact details, what do you do when you need to attend a particular residential building outside work hours?
So you would, initially the information that you require would ideally be in a previous information box or be available to you. You would request, you would become aware, hopefully, if it was a local station attending, they tend to know the local authority housing. So if that was the case, you would request via the main scheme radio for a representative from Kensington and Chelsea to attend this incident, sometimes titled the LALO, which we sometimes use from the local authority for rehousing, and that would also be a point of contact into the council if we required further services from them.
Okay. Earlier on, Mr Davis, I rudely interrupted you whilst you were discussing the question of hydrants, and if I could ask you to turn to page 4 of the ORD.
Mr Kinnear, again, forgive me for interrupting you, but I've got one eye on the clock because we've been running for an hour and a quarter. How much?
We've probably got about another sort of quarter of an hour to go, but it's quite stuffy in here, and might be quite an appropriate time
I'd
for.
like
I'm
a
looking
break,
at
if
Mr.
that's okay.
Davis actually.
You would like a break?
Yeah, if
yes,
that's
I thought
okay.
you might. We'll all have a break. 10 minutes, I think.
Thanks, sir.
Right, we'll have a 10-minute break. Please don't talk to anyone about your evidence when they're out of the room. And we'll be back at 3:25.
Thank you, sir.
You go with the usher. Good, thanks so much. Right, 3:25. Right. Would you like to ask Mr. Davis to come back in? Thank you. All right, Mr. Davis,
Yes, sir.
happy to carry on, I hope?
I am, thank you.
Yes, good, thank you. Yes,
Ms. Davis, thank you very much for coming back. Could I just, if Danny could put up the ORD again, please, and looking at the emergency contacts box, I think it's at page 4 or 5. Page 5 then. And looking at those emergency contacts, were you aware that both identified contacts there were no longer involved in any way with Grenfell Tower by 2017?
I wasn't, no.
No. I suppose, which highlights, would you agree, one of the difficulties about putting in a project manager of a contractor in as an emergency contact?
Yeah, I agreed.
Mr. Davis, apologies, before the break I said that we could go back and look at hydrants at page 4 of the ORD. And if Danny could bring up page 4 for us. And you'll see in site details, Mr. Davis, in the first box, under water supply, I think there was a point you wanted to make, and I cut you off. Apologies.
Yeah, no, that's fine. So that initial information about a water supply is one of the, I'd suggest, the key bits of information an incident commander would like, especially en route to an incident. Within the MDTs, we've got in essence, a map which would, in essence, for Grenfell, would have the outline of Grenfell in a geographical map. And within that database is the hydrant. So there'll be a symbol for a hydrant. So there will be a visual indication without the incident commander having to interrogate the ORD to locate the nearest hydrant. That's you.
Now, you were listening to Mr. Ricketts' evidence earlier on, and we were having discussions about how long it would take to test the lift and whether it could be the firefighters could take control of it. And he thought that test would take between 5 and 10 minutes. Does that sound about right to you?
Yeah, that would sound about right.
Now, given the importance of a lift in relation to firefighting, would you agree that it was necessary to have carried out some form of test of the lift during the course of that visit in March 2017?
The specifics of that visit, if Dean had specifically only gone to look at one specific issue at that time, he has a time slot of an hour and a half, and I think he alluded that to the fact he had other bookings, other appointments to go to. So he physically made that decision that he didn't have time to do it. He may have initially wanted to do it. In hindsight, from what we know now with the lift, it may have identified an issue with the lift, but that test of the lift is only accurate for when you test it. So it could have been they tested it on a Monday and a fault may have been found on the Tuesday.
Do you know whether there was any follow-up from North Ken with the TMO regarding testing of the lift?
I don't know.
Now, could I now turn to the aborted 4-pump exercise due to be carried out on the 8th of June of last year? First of all, were you aware of that exercise?
Yes, I was.
Yeah. Can you briefly summarise for us what the purpose of the exercise was?
So it was a 4-pump exercise that gets allocated to the watches by the central programme. That goes direct to the watch officer. In this instance was Dean. I'm aware of when the 4-pump exercises are planned for my station with the dates and the watches corresponding. I remember specifically about Grenfell in the sense of the building works being done. It was an ideal opportunity to do an exercise there. Dean has to go through a procedure for the exercise. There's a form we call a 5532, which is a risk assessment that has to go through myself. So that shows that Dean had researched, looked at the hazards around the exercise and suitably resourced the exercise. So I was aware of it, having spoken to Dean, yes.
Okay. And if I could ask Danny to bring up LFB document quadruple 03580. There we go. I think this is...
Yeah.
First of all, do you recognise this document?
Yeah, I do, yeah.
And this summarises the purpose of the exercise. And if we look at box 4, training aims and objectives, it says to test crew's ability. And then it also says initial appliance attendance information gathering will be examined, as well as will access to the operational risk database through the mobile data terminal. Can you help us? What is that element of the exercise getting at there? What were they trying to instill into the crew?
So, as the supervising station manager for a 4-pump exercise, my job in essence was to supervise the training exercise, and we would have a range of aims and objectives for that exercise to be completed. So initial appliance attendance information gathering, so that would be, you'd be looking at premise information box, you'd be looking at, as it says, the MDT. That would give my experience as a station manager, having performed that role at an exercise similar, you would get a firefighter to print off the ORD for that premise. And it's that would, in essence, you're looking at the crew's ability to gather information, whether it be through the building itself or through the MDT, as it said there.
Thank you. And if Danny could de-amplify that box, and if we just look at the top of this document, the addressee section, you are the intermediary for the documents to be conveyed to Group Manager Kavanagh. And would you have reviewed this risk assessment before dispatching it to the Group Manager?
Yeah.
And would you indicate that you approve it
Yeah.
and initial it in effect?
Yeah. Yeah.
Can you remember whether there was a plan of Grenfell Tower submitted with the risk assessment form itself?
Not to my knowledge, there wasn't, no. To clarify, I wouldn't expect a plan to be submitted with this document.
Would you have gone back to the ORD to see if anything was missing in order to incorporate an objective for the exercise itself?
No, I wouldn't.
So, for example, having identified that plans were needed, you wouldn't have gone back to the ORD to say, listen, we need to include plans, up-to-date plans for the purposes of this exercise.
If I became aware before the exercise, then I would point that out to Dean that we needed plans for the exercise to be on the MDT. But obviously, I wasn't aware.
Okay. Can I ask you some questions about the AOV mechanism?
Yep.
Now, do you know, can you confirm that Station Manager Andy Walton attended the witnessing of the building management systems at Grenfell Tower on your behalf?
Yeah, I think I actually asked him to attend, if my memory is correct.
And what feedback did you receive from him following that visit?
So my recollection was a verbal feedback. I don't believe I got an email feedback from him. And I remember the information coming to me that it was an automated system. I remember the detail being that it actuated on each floor rather than throughout the building. They were the two key pieces of information that I felt were relevant that needed to go on the ORD actually.
Yeah.
That it was an automated system, the fact that it actuated on a floor rather than throughout the whole building was an important piece of information to go on the ORD.
And do you remember any other information he provided to you following?
So only from his evidence, it prompted me that we had discussed plans around the ventilation system. I can't recall if I spoke to Janice around that or he did. I'm afraid I just can't recall that, but I do, when his evidence was given, it jogged a memory, but I can't remember the detail around it.
Did you have any discussion with Mr. Walton about instructions for using the system? Or would you have simply assumed you needed a fire safety officer there?
No, if he had said he wanted instructions to use it, I would have corrected him and said that the instructions should be in the box, but we wouldn't want the instructions for crews to use, as I said earlier, because we would require a senior fire safety officer to operate it.
Could I retrace my steps slightly in terms of plans? If you weren't getting any plans from the responsible person,
Yeah.
have crews in the past drawn their own plans of floor layout, etc.?
Yeah, absolutely. So you've got you've got lots of different versions. So you could draw a plan on a bit of paper. We haven't got any scanners at fire stations, so we can't scan that document to the system. We have to post it into the PDA section, who would scan and upload the system. Crews, we're not allowed our mobile phones on the appliances, as crews on the fire appliances, senior officers do. I have heard of crews in the past taking photographs on their phone, so then they can email them to themselves to try and get round the system to get the plans. So when I take a photograph, I would suggest either an AFA panel diagram, that's generally where you would find a suitable plan next to the AFA panel. And what they would do is they would physically take a photograph on their personal phone and then email it into their email account and try to upload it on the system that way.
What would be your preference in the hierarchy? Line drawings from the responsible person, handwritten or hand-drawn plans from crews following a Section 72D visit?
For me, the important thing is whatever works best for the MDT terminal. So what I mean by that is part of the QA process that I would ask is for the plans to be printed off. So you visually might, as a station manager, look at a set of plans on your PC screen and you think they're fantastic, but you actually print them off on the MDT and they're illegible. You can't use them. So it depends on what gives you the best result you would go with.
Could I now ask you a question about communications? In relation to the ORD, we can go back to it if you need, but it obviously had a reference to communications in the basement being good. Now, for the purposes of a Section 72D visit, should there be testing of communications using the 3 available modes of communication up and down the tower? And I'll go through each one of the putative available means of communication. First of all, handheld radios. Should you test their efficacy up and down the tower from the base to the highest floor?
For my experience, if you were new to a premise or it's a new building, that would be done. From speaking to the crews at North Kensington, they're all fully aware of the shortfalls with the radios within the tower. I think it goes back to that reference I made earlier about a comment about good comms in the basement. Actually, I wouldn't expect there to be good comms in the basement, so that's a relevant bit of information that was good for the ORD around that.
Use of airwaves. Would you expect an airwave radio, its efficacy, effectiveness to be tested from the basement to the top of the tower?
We're not allowed to, our airwaves are meant to stay in the car. So as a senior officer, we're not meant to have our airwaves on our person on the fire ground.
Would the same answer apply to a question in relation to the use of mobile phones?
A senior officer, I believe, we were allowed to keep our mobile phones on the fire ground. I've never come across a document or a policy that says otherwise.
Now, for the moment, could I ask you some further questions just in relation to discussions with the TMO?
Yeah.
And first of all, is it right that you attended bi-monthly meetings with the TMO?
That's correct, yeah.
Do you recall any confirmation by the LFB to the TMO that the PIB wasn't necessary, provided instruction for the AOV and smoke control panels were available? Can you remember any communication along those lines from the LFB?
Yeah, I can't recall if there was, but my experience would tell me that the premise information box isn't essential. If that information is contained somewhere else that's relevant, then they don't necessarily have to have a premise information box.
But so long as that information is available somewhere in the building?
On site, yeah.
Okay. So those are all the questions I've got for now. However, I'd be grateful for 5 minutes just to review.
Yes. Well, as you probably know, from time to time, Council thinks of further questions that he ought to have asked. So we'll have a 5-minute break now. Same as before, please don't talk to anyone about your evidence. And back at 3:45, Mr. Kinnear, that should... Are you expecting a lot of help, are you?
Well, something needs to be explained to me, so given
well,
the
in
usual
that
time
case,
it takes, if I could
think
ask
we'd
for 10
better-
to 4.
We better indulge you. Right, 10 to 4 then,
Thank you,
please.
sir.
Right, thank you. All right, 10 to 4 then, please.
Thanks, sir.
Yes, a few questions, I imagine, Mr. Kinnear.
You imagine correctly, sir. Thank you.
Yes. Right, I think there are a few more questions.
Mr. Davies, thank you very much. First of all, if I can ask you questions about the premises risk assessment in relation to Grenfell.
Yeah.
First of all, whose job was it to update the PRA?
So that is the watch officer's job, who completes the 72D visit, and then that comes to me in a work queue that I, in essence, make a decision on whether the premise stays on, the ORD, and the frequency of visits for that visit.
Okay. And do you go anything beyond those two roles?
Not in relation to the PRA, no.
Okay. Could I test my luck and ask some questions in respect to the PRA?
Yeah.
If, Danny, you could bring it up. It's LFB quintuple 0144. Now, looking at page 1, halfway down, left-hand side has number of floors, total 25. Would you have picked up that inaccuracy when you were...
I'm not familiar with this document.
You're not... Not at all? Is it format or content?
Sorry, the title at the top of that document would inform me that that's a fire safety regulation document, and as an operational station manager at North Kensington, I would not be...
You'd never see that?
I've never seen that document.
Okay.
No.
That short circuits matters. Thank you. Can I now talk to you about meetings with the TMO? And you confirmed earlier on that your bi-monthly meetings,
Yeah.
you had bi-monthly meetings rather with the TMO. And during the course of those meetings, what specific issues would you expect to be kept updated on by the TMO?
Okay, so to put context, so I would attend that meeting with a member of the regulatory fire safety team. So in essence, we'd have two LFB representatives at the meeting. Two of the main issues were a reduction in automatic fire alarms and a reduction in shutting lift calls. So what that is a pan-London requirement. Part of our safety plan is to reduce the amount of times we attend these incidents. I would run reports that I would forward to Janice, who was the TMO liaison, who we would meet with, and we would identify any premise that had come on our radar for attending. They would start to spike with our attendances. So that could be a result of a fault on the system, it could be a faulty lift that maintenance needed required, and it was a forum where we would discuss options to address those concerns around that. And there was further standing items around the meeting, and Grenfell was one of them regarding refurbishment works.
Now, in respect of that standing item of the refurbishment works, would the TMO be updating you regarding building materials and in particular cladding being applied to the exterior?
No. So I remember specifically speaking to the fire safety, Rebecca Burton, who was the lead who would attend with me from our area, our borough team. And one of my first questions is, do I need to worry about the regulations? Is everything, and as far as I was told, that they are within their regulations as far as she knew it. And her being the regulatory fire safety expert, I would take her guidance on that.
Did you take it further and ask them particularly about the risks arising from cladding when they're involved in fire?
No, not from Rebecca, no.
No. Did you pursue that with anyone from the TMO?
Not from the TMO, no.
Ryden?
No, I believe I had a discussion in relation to the Shepherd's Court fire. So although I didn't attend that fire...
And that was August 2016, wasn't it?
That's correct, yeah. So I was aware that members of my station had attended, and the senior officers, in discussion, there was no formal training around it that I received, but in discussion, to improve my awareness of that, I was informed that the main issue was UPVC windows around that. So it wasn't necessarily a cladding specific risk. However, the main risk associated with that fire was in relation to the UPVC cladding.
Are you able to give us Rebecca's full name and position that you referred to earlier on?
Rebecca Burton,
Burton.
B-U-R-T-O-N, I believe. She's on a lot of email correspondence that I've submitted, and at the time she was the Kensington and Chelsea team leader for regulatory fire safety.
With the council?
No, with LFB.
With LFB.
Yeah.
Final questions now, Mr. Davis. First of all, can you explain what the LFB has described as virtual plates? What are they?
Sorry, say again?
Virtual plates. First of all, are you familiar with that phrase?
No, not specific.
Okay. If you're not familiar, I'm not going to ask you any questions on them.
Right.
So that is a neat conclusion to the questioning I have for Mr. Davis. And
Right.
it just leaves me to say thank you very much for attending the inquiry today.
Yes, I'd add my thanks to that, Mr. Davis. It's really important to us to understand some of these procedures that have to be undertaken, and it's been very helpful to have your evidence about them. So thank you very much indeed for coming.
Thank you, sir.
And you're free to go. Would you like to go with the usher? Thank you very much. Yes, Mr. Clear.
So that concludes the business for today. You have witnesses tomorrow, but they will not be firefighter witnesses.
No.
And you will have Mr. Millett and Mr. Rawat with you tomorrow.
Right. Well, thank you for looking after the witnesses today.
Thanks, sir.
And we'll now break until 10 o'clock tomorrow morning.
Thanks, sir.
10 o'clock tomorrow. Thank you.